whatever it is that takes you out of your comfort zone. And that is so important for us to connect with ourselves. And if I can inspire a single listener there, I think it would be worth it.
Welcome to the Leading Through Crisis podcast, brought to you by Revisionary, exploring resilient leadership in a world of constant change. Every few weeks, Celine Williams, speaker, strategist, and trusted advisor to leaders navigating change, brings conversations that explore how to deal with the inevitable and perpetual shifts of leadership. These discussions reveal practical insights, thoughtful strategies, and stories of resilience to help you lead with clarity and calm.
My guest today is Ketul Patel, president of Omia Consulting, a supply chain and business transformation firm, and the author of A Journey of Elevation. Welcome, Ketul.
Thank you, Celine, and happy to be here. And again, thanks for the opportunity to talk to the audience here.
I'm very, very interested to get into your story because for anyone who's watching the video, there is a background behind Ketul that gives you a hint of what we're going to get into. But before we do that, I'm going to start the way I always start, which is the name of the podcast is Leading Through Crisis. When you hear that phrase, what does it mean to you or what comes up for you?
One word that comes to me is constant.
Tell me more.
Constant being that over my 30 plus years of career taking organizations through transformations, I've noticed a change over the last decade plus or so, right? Where before we used to have these planned transformations, right? Or companies would be able to plan out their 3-5 year strategies and where they want to go, and not just large corporations, even mid-sized organizations as well. And over the last decade or so, I think we have gone into a constant crisis mode. Right. And so what we used to have contingency planning, as we used to call before, as something, hey, we'll just have something for our backups, in the event hell breaks loose somewhere, or, being in supply chain, one of the nodes would shut down, a warehouse will go, we'll kind of activate that. And then now the crisis has taken on a different meaning, which is also influencing the leaders that have kind of adopted and have grown through that, is that the crisis has become more of a constant thing. And now it's more about what your next day or next quarter, next year is going to look like, let alone thinking about 5 years out. Mm-hmm. And that's why, that word of constant kind of comes to mind here.
Years ago, this was probably 8 years ago now, I was doing a talk and I was talking about the rate of change and how the speed of the rate of change at that point, and I think the data was even a few years old then, and saying, if this rate of change continues to grow exponentially the way it has, we can't comprehend that as humans, right? There's only so much we can do. And I bring that up because what you're saying, what I hear is exactly that, is that there's constant crisis, partly because everything is changing all the time in ways that as humans, as individuals, as businesses, we don't even know how to navigate it. It's a lot for our brains.
Exactly. And I think that is why it related so much to me, when actually I went through this journey that we were talking about and hiking, trekking up to the Everest Base Camp, where every day is kind of a crisis mode that you are in or you're operating in. And it was so relatable to what we kind of, even today, as I talk with the CEOs and executives in different organizations, that everyone is trying to figure out and not knowing what's to come and what's going to hit them next day, what story is going to hit them and how they would have to react, which will then reciprocate in decisions that, they may or may not take the right decisions at that moment. And it may show up out in the market, out in their customer base or with their employees. And it's always something that the management has to look out for.
Yeah. So since you mentioned your trek up to Everest Base Camp, tell us that story. because that is the picture I was referring to behind Ketul for anyone listening, not watching. But tell us a little, walk us through that a bit.
Sure. This was certainly, as you can imagine, a lifetime, once in a lifetime experience.
It's not something you do every year.
And
Interesting.
that's right. And something I also talk about as well in the book about the why, right? As to because I've been also asked those questions as to why did you even think of going up there? There are so many peaks over here. You could just go and within the US or somewhere else, and but venturing out all the way to 17,000 plus feet. And so I think, but there was a lot that we had to kind of go through in terms of the thinking and understanding why I really wanted to do this, as a personal challenge or something that I wanted to kind of go outside my zone, if you will, right? And one thing led to another, and then certainly my wife accompanied me as well, and along with a few friends, and we started to do a lot of prep work in terms of really. It wasn't an easy decision, by the way. And so it took us a while to kind of do a lot of due diligence understanding because normally people go through phases, right, to get up there, right? They
Okay.
would do probably different peaks, go up maybe 10,000 feet, and sometimes they would go to 14,000ers or so, and then eventually think of going further up. And we were now going all the way, just the regular hikes that we used to do here. Yeah, we did some challenging hikes, but nothing at this scale. And everyone kind of were in it and committed to kind of move forward. Then the preparation and everything started. And we went through, the most surreal, amazing, mesmerizing, spiritual, challenging, heart-throbbing experience over the 12-day journey in the Himalayas, right? As we started out from Kathmandu and then came back, but it went through pretty much all the weather patterns, all types of terrains that you could imagine, bridges, valleys, waterfalls, mudslides, snow, glaciers, and something that you also see behind there, which is very close as we were getting close to the Everest Base Camp and ultimately making it all the way to the Everest Base Camp. And really fortunate to share that, the entire team, we were 10 of us, and all of us eventually made it out there. Really, really a great learning experience, but it also kind of pushed my reset button and helped out in many ways. And yeah, it was truly, truly amazing.
So I have a few questions. I'm going to start with this question because I imagine in 12 days of hiking up to base camp, there are daily challenges that one would encounter. What were some of the biggest challenges for you in, as an individual, but also for the group? And I ask this because when we think about teams, sometimes what we think as is the biggest challenge, when we talk to the team after, we talk to people after, different perceptions show up. So I'm curious if you had those conversations, and if so, what some of the challenges for the team, like your group, were separate from what you thought the greatest challenges were.
Now, this is a great question, and this is probably the biggest takeaway, right? One of the biggest takeaways that I had there in terms of that the challenge is, and as I call it, right, as you go up there, altitude humbles you. And at that point, whatever the differences are, or whatever the backgrounds are, whatever your professional backgrounds, and we had a team of, right, engineers, technologists, accountants, entrepreneurs, all in that group, right? So you can imagine kind of the diversity in terms of the thinking that it brings to the table. But as we started out, that's one thing we realized, right? That as you start talking about altitude, as you start talking about the challenge is so magnanimous that all the differences look petty.
Mm.
And because now you're focusing on the ultimate goal that you have. And a perfect example, as you talked about, right? As I also write in the book around, we started our journey with a plan C. So in
Okay.
spite of all the preparations and discussions and coordinations that we did with the guides, and one thing that they had alluded us is that you are at the behest of a climate and weather in the mountains, right? And so you have to respect that and work within that constraint, right? You will never be able to fight it.
Right.
And so how do you recognize it? And it was the day before we were about to start, and we got the news, right? That the weather pattern was not ideal flying into Lukala, which was the airport we had to fly into from Kathmandu. And so there was now, over the last couple, 3 days, although we were hoping that it was going to open up and then the backlog would have cleared up, it didn't.
Mm.
And so now we started to look the typical backup plan, right? Just as I was talking earlier, as part of contingency planning, we knew that, okay, if the plane wouldn't land, probably we might be able to take a helicopter ride, although it might be a little expensive, but from a different airport and fly into Lukla. And then that plan B also failed.
Mm.
And so now we had to come up with an impromptu plan along with the guides, obviously, under the clear direction of the guides, that we had to actually take a 19-hour grueling Jeep ride into the mountains
Wow.
and then start our trek from a remote location. We didn't even know the names of the towns before, right? Because we never researched the remote part of Nepal.
Right.
And that's how it started. But going back to your point, so there were a lot of discussions, but what we didn't have is time.
Mm.
And this is part of that, as I talk about the plan C thinking, is where today leaders are always under crisis. And how the leaders can adapt to that plan C thinking, where it's a mindset, whether when the weather, terrain, or time constrained narrowed our options so quickly and certainty disappeared. And so it's the plan C meant that we have to accept, meant accepting that the original plan, even which was the obvious backup, were no longer viable. And so how do we shift now our focus from optimizing our plan, right, to preserve our mission?
It's a great example of you just can't control what you can't control. And at a certain point, whether you like it or not, you're faced with the, okay, so what can I control? It's not going to be what I want to control, but what can I actually control for in this situation, and how do I accept that? Which is what clearly you ended up doing. So it's a great real life example of that, and shifting and adapting with it. So not getting too stuck in trying to control what you can't control, because there are people who would, the reality is that there are people who will, it will just wait another day or another couple days, or they try and wait for the thing that they want to control as opposed to shifting. It's also a great example of, which is really applicable to leaders and workplaces, is this idea of alignment and heading in the same direction. If you're heading towards that goal of getting to the base camp and you're in alignment that that is the direction everyone is going in, it's much easier to find another solution because you're solving for the same thing.
That's right. I called it the illusion of control
Yeah,
over
100.
there.
Yeah,
When we were up there, we had made all the preparations. And every day it was a reset moment in the morning, right? So it started the night before, and we would regroup. The guides would walk us through as to what's coming up next day. They would give us, initial indications of what the weather looks like and whatnot, and so that we can be better prepared. With that, what they cannot tell us is how is your individual body going to react,
of course.
especially as we were up further up beyond 10, 11,000 feet, right? And that is where, so we felt that, okay, we had prepared with the gear, the food, and everything that was needed there. That was obvious, but still at the end of the day, when we would be sitting down for dinner again, it would be like, wow, what just happened? And then it's again another day. So I think it's that illusion of control, which kind of mirrors how, right, in business or life, we don't control every variable, but what we control is how we can respond to it.
Yes, absolutely. And I love what you said about the illusion of control. I talk a lot about the illusion of certainty, which is that people want certainty, quote unquote. They search for certainty. There's no such thing. Nothing is certain. Oftentimes they're looking to feel safe and they're talking about certainty. And it happens whether it's hiking or in the workplace or wherever, where it's like, if it, comes with control. If this happens, then I am certain there's certainty in that. And it's like, no, you're trying to feel safe. And if we can shift that and let go of the control, because it is an illusion, and let go of the idea of certainty, also an illusion, then we can think about how can I feel safe in this moment? What do I need in this moment? That's not an illusion.
Absolutely.
I'm going to say first and foremost, it's wonderful, and I'm very glad that your trek up to the base camp was a success. You mentioned that when you came back, you had a bit of a reset, believe was the word that you used, that there was a reset. Can you tell me a little bit about that? How the trek, what it inspired you to reset, or where that reset came from?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest thing as I kind of look back and see how I've changed, I think my understanding of perseverance, so much into kind of thinking perseverance to be more of grit. You're pushing through deadlines and solving problems and outlasting the competition, and you're in this times you're always thinking of going into, by doing those things, you always want to be proactive and thinking ahead, and you feel that you are in control. But on the trail, the perseverance took on a new meaning,
Hmm.
right? And at altitude where you feel that every breath is borrowed, right? And progress isn't about just speed. Yes, we had a constraint that we have a flight to go back to India and then eventually to US. But that was kind of the time constraint. That did not mean that if we didn't hit that, right, hell will break loose. But you still kind of you learn to walk deliberately, one slow, intentional step at a time. And as we kind of framed our motto, which was a breath at a time and a step at a time, right? And at certain point, especially when the air started to get thinner, we literally had to time our steps
Hmm.
so that the breath, you're not consuming too much air and you're not being too aggressive in any of your moves, but you're preserving your energy, or you're conserving your energy to last longer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I think the unexpected challenges, right, that we would kind of look at, and I talked about plan C. I also write about the day of 10/11, as I call it, where we had to go through the mudslides that had happened just recently, and we had to pass through that, and it was probably the longest day of our journey of 13 hours over, sorry, yeah, almost about 12, 13 hours with upwards of 13 kilometers that we kind of trekked in up and down in the mountains at night as well. And so I think it was the perseverance became more about that. It's not about just pushing through, but pacing yourself strategically with discipline and with self-regulation, right? And that may also mean that you may have to define your success. So even though we knew that our ultimate goal was up there, but we also had to calibrate ourselves that if we don't pass that particular day, what we are going to achieve in 10 days from now doesn't mean a thing at that time. So we had to kind of define our success on a daily basis, how we are going to go through that I think that really helped me kind of think through in terms of where does that success comes from and how the mountain humbles you. And the leadership that we talk about is oftentimes, right? It's about pushing through and looking at the next milestone and moving on. But then you also take a pause and think of and add empathy, and demonstrate more empathy with your teams and how you kind of take the team with you there. And I think that definitely provided kind of different perspectives on how I see things as I come across and work with organizations, helping them go through their crisis or transformations today.
I'm going to pivot a bit. It's based on what you said, to be clear, but it's a bit of a pivot from the story of Everest, and I'll connect the dots here because I think it makes a lot of sense, the shift that you're talking about to one breath at a time, one step at a time, and being very deliberate in an approach to the mountain that then translates into life. And it's almost in opposition to a lot of the language that you hear, whether it's as an entrepreneur or in business or the corporate world where they talk about grinding it out and you have to move fast and you just do and you do and it's quite frankly often not very deliberate. It is just doing, right? You are in action because action is the thing that matters. And so I'm connecting those dots to ask the question, how has that shifted how you approach your work or the work you do with organizations in the work that you do because of how kind of built in or accepted or not questioned that idea of grinding and just move is? Because it is very different than being deliberate, and it's okay to move slow because you're persevering and there's progress in that.
Yeah, great question there. And this is something that I encounter on a daily basis,
I can
right? And as we
imagine.
as we said, right, none of us are going to be able to change the crisis environment that I talked about earlier, right? And but what it does is, and one of the core elements that I also recognized about the teamwork there, right? And the partner that we chose being our guide, our tour guides, the team of Sherpas with us. And there were moments where we had become totally vulnerable to what they were going to chart out for, either that day or for the journey, right? Yes, we can ask the questions to understand, but it was so new territory that you have to rely on the people who have been there, done that. Yes, you can ask questions in a way that elicits that information from them, that gives you confidence to know that these guys have thought through that. We did a lot of reference checks and things like that. And so I think there are people that you rely on in certain times for in certain areas. But then what really that showed us is that how they helped, with the quiet calm, that even though we knew in many days that we were in a literally crisis. Even as we were going up there, we were still debating about, hey, should we just take a chopper right now from here to there? And there were so many things happening, but they came with that poise, that calm, right? That quiet, the silent leadership, as you call it, and giving us the confidence that just stay the course, believe in us, and then we'll get there, right? But I think from also going back to your question about the leadership that you talk about, is being able to pause, even if it's for a moment, and reflect on the larger picture, right? As opposed to rush. We're not going to be able to change a crisis. Crisis is going to happen. It's inevitable. But at that point, also, you don't have as much time, just the way we did over there as well. But if you had enough information to kind of make the right judgment, take a pause, and reflect on your team. And then many times we also saw that, which I also write about, the situational leadership. So at times there are leaders that are unknown in the teams that you are around that shows up in that moment. But what do you do as the leader to allow that environment to prosper there amongst the crisis where there will be some situational leader that will evolve, devoid of titles or authority or whatever that may be, and that will take you to the next day, right? And so we had every day there would be one of us you will see in a leader role, not as a designated leader, but they would be cracking jokes or providing some, high morale and, and be the champion for that day for the team. And the next day it could be someone else.
I think it's a great example because there's a type of leader who does not allow or will not allow those situational leaders to pop up because they feel threatened by it. And there is a type of leader and often a situation, crisis situations are great examples, where you have to allow that because one person can't do everything, can't respond to everything. And so it's a great example of why allowing people the space and allowing other leaders to step into a moment or a lifetime of leadership and take that spotlight actually benefits everyone ultimately. Because that's what it did, right? It benefited everyone who was on the trek with you to have those situational leaders be able to step into that spotlight for whatever amount of time they were there.
That's right. And as we have kind of used this cliche quite a bit about servant leadership, right? And that is what I saw kind of firsthand there,
Mm,
right? In the group of the guides. That even though they knew that they were the ones who were leading the course and everything, but that quietness, the calm leadership from behind, making sure that their ultimate goal was our success. And they wouldn't, you wouldn't see them, being very heroic or, calling out shots and whatnot, but it's very subtle way that they influenced us and then made sure that the hurdles that we may encounter in that day or 2 days later, that they are at least staying ahead of it and trying to solve those when we get there.
I want to go back to something that you said for a minute, and you mentioned the importance of pausing, right? Pausing and assessing, being able to make a better decision, right? So, crisis situation, dangerous situation, change situation, whatever it is, there is a limited amount of time, but skipping the pause actually long term does a disservice to everyone who's involved in that situation. And I think we tell ourselves, a lot of times leaders, organizations, the world tells ourselves, no, no, we just have to react, decide, move forward, action, react, decide, move forward. And we miss that pause. We miss it entirely. And the fact that you mentioned the pausing, I didn't want to skip over it because it is so important as part of the process of making the best decision in the moment. Noting information changes, decisions can change, etc. But if we want to make the best decision, if we want to actually use the time we have effectively, pausing matters.
Absolutely. And I think this is great, a kind of way to kind of also look at that as we talk about the pause, what do you do in that pause? Right?
Yes.
And in this day and age, now we know that we are so all the organizations are so data rich, right? And then the organizations are at a varying scale of being data savvy, right? And so there's abundant of data, but how the data gets used is what really drives as to what each of the organization do in that pause
Hmm.
and how quickly can they leverage that pause time to kind of move on and make that decision, right? And in many instances, and actually, I'm working with organizations where, in devoid of that information, the fact information, it all happens to be about opinions,
Hmm.
right? Perspectives, and then a decision gets made. So I think it's very important that as to when that pause happens, and even recognizing that how long of a pause you do have,
Yes.
right? And but it's being aware of your surroundings, and which is something also I learned, on my track as well, is that every day, even though like that illusion of control that we were talking about, that it was, although we were prepared, but we had to be in that moment every day,
Hmm.
looking at the signals around us, looking at how our body was reacting. And it was not just at the start of the day when we used to measure how we are doing, but even interim during the day we would have to see our oxygen levels. Where are we, right? Are we feeling any headaches? Are we dehydrated? Do we have enough clothing? Are we shivering? I mean, so we had to be in that moment to be able to recognize that what to do about it.
I'm gonna ask, I feel like there's so many more directions that we can go. So I'm going to not do that and ask the question instead. Before we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't get to that you want to talk about, or something that you might want to emphasize that we did talk about before we kind of, bring this to a close?
One last thing I would mention to the listeners is that if I can, inspire you with this, or right by reading the book, to find your own base camp moments. And it doesn't have to be, that you have to climb or hike a mountain over 17,000 feet. It's something that it's just enough for you to question that, hey, is this even reasonable to do that? Or, if you're pick up a hobby, but that hobby and take it to the level that really inspires you and unlocks and gives you an opportunity to know yourself, right? If you're a musician, or if you have a hobby of playing music, think of composing something or creating an album, right? If you like working with the cars, think of refurbishing an old vintage and getting it going, right? I mean, whatever it is that takes you out of your comfort zone. And that is so important for us to connect with ourselves. And if I can inspire a single listener there, I think it would be worth it.
I love that. And I think that is a great note for everyone because while not everyone, I very much admire and respect hiking Everest Base Camp. That is not my thing by any stretch. I always joke that I'm one of those people that I like to go for day hikes. If it involves camping, that is not for me. However, to put it into the perspective of where are the places that I can stretch myself, that I can find something that is outside of my comfort zone, even if it's a hobby where it's like, well, now I'm gonna, instead of sewing bags, I'm going to make a jacket, right? That stretch, whatever that thing is, composing a piece of music, it instills confidence and it lets us know ourselves. And that growth and that learning and testing ourselves and our ability to deal with the mistakes that are always going to be made along those ways goes a long way. And I very much appreciate you bringing it back to that because I think it's a really important lesson for people to hear.
Of course.
Thank you for sharing your story with me and with the listeners. It's extremely inspiring, and I hope everyone buys the book that will be linked in the show notes and checks you out and learns more about you because it is truly your story is incredible and glad you made it safely and that you're here to tell us all about it and that you wrote a book about it because that is pretty cool.
Thank you, Celine, and truly appreciate the opportunity and to share my thoughts with your viewers and the audience here. And hey, go find your own base camp moment.
Go find your own base camp moment. I love that. Perfect place to end it.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Leading Through Crisis, hosted by Celine Williams and brought to you by Revisionary. To learn more, visit leadingthroughcrisis.ca, connect with Celine on LinkedIn, and explore the show notes for resources and next steps. Until next time, keep leading with courage and clarity.